This talk was delivered at the Gakushuin Hojinkai on November 25th, 1914.
Today is actually the first time I've ever set foot inside this place called Gakushuin. Of course, I had a rough idea of where it was. Somewhere around here, I guess. But to be honest, I didn't really know exactly where. Coming inside like this, that's definitely a first for me. As Mr. Okada mentioned earlier when he introduced me, back in the spring you invited me to come give a lecture. At that time, however, something came up on my side. The exact details Mr. Okada seems to remember better than I do, and he just explained it to you all in a way that I think made sense. Anyway, the result was that I had no choice but to decline once. Still, turning you down outright felt a bit too rude, so I added a condition. Next time, I'll come. Just to be sure, I asked Mr. Okada, so when would next time be? He said October this year. So I did a quick mental calculation from spring to October and thought, if I've got that much time, I'll manage somehow. With that in mind, I clearly said, all right, I'll do it. Then whether I should call it lucky or unlucky, I got sick. I ended up stuck in bed for all of September, and before I knew it, the promised month of October had arrived. By October, I was no longer bedridden, but I was still pretty wobbly on my feet, so giving a proper lecture felt like a stretch. However, a promise is a promise, and I couldn't just forget about it. So deep down, I was thinking, sooner or later, they'll reach out. They'll definitely reach out. And to be honest, I was quietly dreading that moment. In the meantime, the wobbliness finally went away, and I was back to normal. But on your side, there was no word at all right up to the end of October. I hadn't let you know I'd been sick, but apparently there was a little note about my illness in a couple of newspapers. So I figured someone here had put two and two together, understood the situation, and probably had someone else give the lecture in my place. Once I decided that must be what happened, I started to relax. And then suddenly, Mr. Okada shows up again. He came all the way out to the back end of Waseda wearing boots. Well, to be fair, it was raining that day, so maybe that was just practical. But still, he made the trip in that getup and told me, we've decided to postpone the lecture until the end of November, so I'd like you to do it as promised. I had already assumed I'd dodge that responsibility, so to be honest, I was a little shocked. But I thought, well, there's still a whole month left. Something will come together in the meantime. And I said again, all right, I'll do it. So that's how things went, from spring to October, and then from the end of October to November 25th today. I actually had plenty of time to put together a well-organized talk, but I just couldn't get into the right headspace. The very idea of thinking seriously about it felt unbearably bothersome. So I took the lazy way out. I decided I won't worry about it until November 25th actually shows up, and just let the days slide by, day after day. A couple of days ago, when the date was really closing in, I did feel a slight twinge. I guess I really should think of something. But even then, the thought of thinking was so unpleasant that, in the end, I just spent the time drawing pictures instead. Now, if I say drawing pictures, it might sound as if I was working on something grand. In reality, I was just sketching trivial things, sticking them on the wall, and staring at them absent-mindedly for 2 or 3 days straight. Yesterday, I think it was, someone came over and said, "This picture is interesting." Well, not interesting exactly, but it looks like something you drew when you were in a really interesting mood. So I told him, I didn't draw it because I was in a good mood. I drew it because I was in a bad mood, and explained the state of my mind. There are people who, when they're in high spirits and can't sit still, end up turning that energy into paintings, calligraphy, or writing. On the other hand, there are people who, because they're feeling miserable and want to somehow shift themselves into a better mood, pick up a brush and create a painting or some piece of writing. And strangely enough, sometimes the emotional state behind those two patterns, one starting from joy, the other from frustration, ends up looking very similar in the finished work. But that's just a side note. It has nothing to do with the main thread of today's talk, so I won't dig into it further. The point is, I just sat there staring at those odd little pictures, and before I knew it, I had completely failed to build any real content for this lecture. Then today, the 25th, finally arrived, and at this point, whether I wanted to or not, I had no choice but to show my face here. So this morning I tried to pull my thoughts together a bit, but frankly, my preparation feels pretty thin. I don't think I can give you the kind of polished, satisfying lecture you might be hoping for. So please listen today with that in mind and with a bit of patience. I don't know exactly when this lecture series started or how long it has been running, but every time you invite some outsider to come and speak, that's perfectly normal as far as general custom goes. I agree it's not odd at all. At the same time, if you look at it from another angle, I can't help thinking, no matter who you drag in from outside, it's not that easy to get a talk that really hits the sweet spot you're hoping for. Maybe, just maybe, you find people from the outside interesting, mainly because they're unfamiliar. Let me share a little satirical story I once heard from a professional storyteller. A long time ago, two feudal lords went hawking in the Meguro area. After riding all over the place, they became terribly hungry. Unfortunately, they had brought no lunch, got separated from their retainers, and had no way to get anything proper to eat. With no other option, the two of them barged into a dirty little farmer's house nearby and said, "Give us whatever you've got, anything, just feed us." The old farmer and his wife felt sorry for them and decided to help. They grilled some leftover sori and offered it with barley rice. The two lords found that sori so delicious that they filled up happily and left. Even the next day, the smell of that sori still seemed to linger in their noses. They just couldn't get the taste out of their minds. So one of the lords decided to invite the other over and give him a formal sori feast. When the retainers heard this, they were stunned. But orders are orders, so they couldn't openly object. They told the cooks, "Use tweezers to pull out every single tiny bone from the sori, one by one, then marinate the fish in mirin or something similar, grill it to perfection, and serve it to our Lord and his guest." The problem was the diners had not skipped meals that day, and this over-the-top refined sori, with all its character removed, had lost the very flavor that made it good. They poked at it with their chopsticks, but it simply wasn't tasty at all. So the two lords looked at each other and said that now famous punchline, "Sori is best in Meguro." That's the end of the story. From my perspective, you students here at this fine institution, being around excellent teachers all the time, and yet going out of your way to wait from spring all the way to late autumn to listen to someone like me, it feels very much like those lords bored with a steady diet of fine cuisine, suddenly craving a rough, smoky sori from Meguro just for a change of pace. Professor Omori, who is sitting here today, finished university around the same time as I did, maybe the same year, maybe a little before or after. At some point, he once said to me something like, "Students these days don't really listen to my lectures seriously. Their attitude is sloppy, they lack seriousness. It's a problem." As I recall, he was talking about students at some private school, not Gakushuin students. But in any case, I said something rather rude in reply at the time. It's a bit embarrassing to repeat it here, but I told him, "Is there any country in the world where students would be genuinely grateful to listen to lectures like yours?" Now, my real intention probably didn't fully come across to him then, so let me take this opportunity to clear up any misunderstanding. Back when I was a student, roughly your age, or maybe a little older, we were far lazier than you. To be blunt, at least in my circle, we almost never listened seriously to our teachers' lectures. Of course, I'm speaking primarily about myself and the people around me. This may not apply outside that little radius, but looking back now, I strongly feel that's how it was. On the surface, I might have looked like a quiet, obedient type, but I was never the kind of person who listened attentively to lectures. I was always slacking off, drifting along. With that memory in mind, when I look at today's earnest students, I just cannot bring myself to criticize them the way Omori does. From that point of view, I ended up saying something quite reckless to him. I didn't come here today just to apologize to Professor Omori, but since we're all together like this, let me take the chance to say sorry publicly. The story has wandered a bit, so let me pull it back to the main track. Here's what I'm getting at. All of you attend an excellent school and are constantly being taught and guided by excellent teachers. You listen daily to their expert lectures, whether specialized or general. Given that, why bring in someone like me from outside and go out of your way to listen to a lecture? It is again like those lords craving maguro sori. You're probably just curious to taste something different once. Honestly, I'm convinced that the everyday talks you hear from your regular teachers, the ones you see all the time, are far more useful and in many ways more interesting than anything I can offer. Even if I were a professor here myself, the simple fact that I wouldn't be new would be enough that you probably wouldn't gather in such numbers with this level of curiosity or enthusiasm to hear me talk. Now, why do I say this? Because, in fact, there was a time when I almost became a teacher at Gakushuin. I didn't campaign for it myself. A friend of mine who worked here recommended me. At that time, I was such a naive fool that, right up until graduation, I didn't know what I should do to earn a living. But once I actually stepped into the real world, I quickly realized that sitting with my hands in my pockets wasn't going to pay the rent. So regardless of whether I was suited to be an educator, I needed to find some place to slip into. That's how I ended up following my friend's suggestion and trying for a position at this school. Back then, there was one rival candidate, but my friend kept saying, "Don't worry, it'll work out." So I gradually started to feel as if I'd already landed the job. I even asked him, half seriously, "So what kind of clothes does a teacher have to wear?" He said, "You can't go into the classroom without a morning coat." So before anything was even decided, I went ahead and had a morning coat tailored. The funny part is, I didn't even really know where Gakushuin was located at the time. When the coat was finally finished, guess what? The Gakushuin position fell through. Another man was chosen to fill the vacant English teacher post. I've forgotten his name now. I'm sure that's because I didn't really feel bitter about it. I think I heard he was someone who'd come back from America. If that man hadn't been hired, and by some lucky fluke I had been, and if I had stayed on here all these years, I might never have been invited to stand on this nice high platform and talk to you like this. Instead, you've waited from spring until November to listen to me, which basically shows that I failed to become a teacher at Gakushuin and am now being treated as a kind of maguro sori, a rare taste from outside, so to speak.